Okay, let's unpack this. Sometimes the history we think we know, the stories we're told, they aren't the only versions floating around out there.
That's true. What if some really widely accepted historical narratives, even about, say, major events, were actually significantly inaccurate?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? The idea that the historical ground we stand on might look completely different from another angle.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much the landscape we're exploring in this deep dive.
We've got our hands on a really fascinating set of sources, basically, transcripts from YouTube videos. They feature a speaker identified as a Bulgar academic.
And these sources, well, they lay out a truly distinct picture of history and identity. A big focus is on the Bulgar people.
Right, so our mission here is pretty clear. We want to guide you through these sources, pull out the key claims, the perspectives, the specific details they contain.
We're essentially stepping into the world, as these sources describe it, trying to understand their arguments as they present them. We're not here to verify or debate the claims themselves.
Exactly. Think of it like exploring a map drawn from a completely different viewpoint. Our job is just to show you what's on that map.
And we should be upfront. Some of these claims are quite striking. They diverge pretty significantly from mainstream accounts.
For sure. It's all about understanding what these specific sources say.
So where do we begin? Let's start where the source material really directs us, with a major historical event. The siege and capture of Kazan in 1552.
Okay, so according to these sources, the history of the fall of Kazan that's commonly taught, well, they describe it in no uncertain terms as 99% false.
Wow, 99% false.
Yeah. The only truth they seem to acknowledge is that Ivan the Terrible's troops did take the city.
Everything else they're saying is basically fabrication.
And they immediately zero in on the details you usually hear and challenge them. Take troop numbers, for instance.
Okay.
Textbooks might say Ivan the Terrible had, around 150,000 soldiers. These sources claim the actual number was way higher, closer to 500,000.
500,000, that's more than 3 times the usual figure. Huge difference.
It is. And the timeline is also contested. The traditional story often gives August 23rd as the date Ivan approached Kazan, and October 2nd for when it was taken.
Right, that sounds familiar.
But the sources dispute this. They claim the siege didn't start in late August at all.
Oh, when do they say it started?
Much earlier. They claim it began on June 22nd, 1552, and lasted a full 100 days.
June 22nd. And they actually highlight the significance of that specific date, don't they?
They do. They note it's a day Bulgars worldwide apparently celebrate as their statehood day, commemorating, they say, the formation of a Bulgar state in the Balkans some 20,000 years ago.
Interesting connection. The source even draws a parallel, pointing out Hitler's invasion of the USSR also happened on June 22nd, targeting territory they describe as historically part of Great Bulgaria.
And then there's the source's view of Ivan the Terrible himself. It gets really interesting here.
How so?
They suggest Ivan was actually, fearful, that he deliberately stayed away from the fighting around the city.
Afraid. Ivan the Terrible.
That's the claim. And, incredibly, the source also claims Ivan the Terrible did not consider himself Russian.
Wait, what? Not Russian?
They claim he told an Englishman directly, "I am not Russian." That's a pretty bold statement presented in the source.
Absolutely. And then there's a fundamental claim about the siege itself revolving around who was actually defending Kazan.
Right. This seems crucial to their argument.
The sources are adamant. They say the city was taken from the Bulgars, not the Tatars.
Because according to their narrative, the Tatar people, as we understand them today, just weren't there.
Exactly. They claim that group simply did not exist in that region at that time.
Okay, and the scale of the city itself is another point they raise.
Yes. The sources argue Ivan the Terrible did not storm the modern Kazan Kremlin.
Why not?
They say it's far too small. It couldn't possibly house the number of defenders claimed. They cite Kurbsky, a chronicler of the time, who mentioned 30,000 defenders.
And the source says that's impossible within the modern Kremlin's area.
Right. They call it impossible in such a limited space. Instead, they claim Ivan stormed a much, much vaster city of Kazan, one that encompassed significant surrounding territory.
A vast city. How vast?
They describe this historical city as enormous, maybe holding 80,000 people, with 30 surrounding forts. Forts that the enemy forces apparently had to capture over those 100 days.
Suffering heavy losses even before reaching the main city walls.
That's the picture they paint. And they attribute the city's eventual fall to a terrible, unheard-of betrayal by Bulgar traders.
Traders who surrendered the forts.
Yes, and who later, according to the source, became what they call service Tatars and part of the Russian nobility.
The sources also make a point about Ivan not destroying the whole city, right? Preserving buildings.
Correct. They claim he preserved buildings because, in their view, Bulgars were simply superior builders.
Do they give examples?
They do. Specific examples from the modern Kazan Kremlin. They claim the bases of the Spasskaya Tower and what's now called the Vladimirskaya Tower, which they call by the Bulgar name Yeged Kalasi, are original Bulgar constructions.
Yeged Kalasi. And they mentioned something about a crescent moon.
Yes, they note the latter tower historically had a crescent moon on it.
And building materials, too. Something about Bulgar brick.
They make a specific point about that, stating Bulgar brick is far more durable than stone.
More durable than stone. How?
Well, as an example, they claim the Astrakhan Kremlin was built using 6th century Bulgar brick, originating from the ancient Bulgar city of Atil, highlighting its longevity and quality, according to them.
Wow. Okay. So that's their really detailed alternative take on just one pivotal historical event.
But these sources, they don't just focus on one battle. They present this truly expansive, sweeping history of Bulgar identity, spanning millennia, continents.
Right. It's much broader. So let's talk about their view of Bulgar origins. Where do they say it all started?
It's incredibly vast and ancient, according to them. They claim Bulgars originated from the Balkans, specifically Thrace or Thracia.
Thrace. And when?
Around 20,000 years ago, and from there, they claim, Bulgars spread across Europe and Asia.
20,000 years. And they connect the name Balkan itself.
They do. They assert the name Balkan actually translates to Bulgar in the Bulgar language.
Okay. And this spread resulted in what they call Great Bulgaria.
Yes, or sometimes Scythia. According to these sources, this state, which they describe as the first state in the world, formed 33,000 years ago.
Wait, 33,000 years? The first state?
That's their claim. And that it stretched from the middle Danube near modern Vienna all the way east to the Pacific Ocean.
Danube to the Pacific.
Yeah.
And held continuously by Bulgars.
Continuously held, yes. That's a tremendous claim about historical continuity and territory.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Which naturally leads to a crucial question in their narrative.
If Great Bulgaria covered such a huge area, what about all the different peoples living there today, the ones known by different names?
Right. What's their explanation?
The sources claim that many modern ethnic groups are actually descended from Bulgar tribes, that historically they either identified as Bulgars or were known by names that meant Bulgar in their own languages.
Okay, that sounds like a major recategorization. Who do they include in this?
The list the source provides is, well, it's extensive and frankly quite surprising from a mainstream perspective.
Like who?
They claim Komis, Germans, whose name Nemtsi allegedly means Bulgar in German.
Germans, okay.
Udmurts, whose name Eri supposedly means Bulgar. Khanty and Mansi, collectively called Ostayaks, which they claim means Bulgar in Buryat. Ilmins from Kamchatka, the name meaning Bulgar in their language. Buryats also claim to mean Bulgar. And the Mari, historically called Cheremisi, meaning Bulgar.
Wow. So many groups traditionally seen as distinct. They'd suggest these names were changed or suppressed.
Yes, particularly during the Soviet era, according to the source.
And the linguistic claims must be pretty central to this whole idea, too.
Oh, absolutely. Sweeping linguistic claims. They state that Slav, or Slavyanin, is actually a direct translation of the Bulgar word Bulgar.
Meaning
Glorious or glorious person. They claim ancient Greek literature also equates Bulgars and Slavs.
So basically, anyone categorized as Finno-Ugric, Turkic, or Slavic within this vast historical region
is, in their view, part of a Bulgar tribe speaking a Bulgar language. They even list 7 historical Bulgar languages.
A 7, such as?
Including one called Akil, which they say is now called Old Slavic, and another called Tuk, which they connect to Thracian.
Akil and Tuk.
Go.
Okay, and Attila fits into this narrative somehow.
He does, woven right in. According to the sources, Attila was a Bulgar ruler from the Dulo clan.
And they describe his appearance.
Yes, as European-looking. Tall, fair, blue eyes. And they give him quite a title.
Which is?
Father of the modern geographical map of Europe and the world.
Why that title?
Because, in their account, he allocated territories for various peoples. He drew the lines, so to speak.
And they mention different names for him.
They do. Names they associate with Attila among different groups, like Talib or Attil for Volga Bulgars, Tellin for Finns, linking it to the city, Tallinn.
Tellin, from Tellin. Interesting. Others?
Ali or Oslo for Scandinavians, linking Oslo to that name. They specifically claim Ali means land of Bulgars.
Land of Bulgars, and even the Volga River.
Its historical Boulder name, they claim, is also Bulga or Buga.
Okay, that's a lot of ancient history. A massive sweep of territory claiming this single hidden identity behind so many modern groups.
It really is.
Now let's turn to what you mentioned earlier, arguably the most controversial, maybe the most central claim in these sources. The nature and origin of the Tatar people as they're understood today.
Right. The sources make a very strong, very specific assertion here.
Which is?
That the Tatar people, as commonly understood today, did not historically exist in the Volga-Ural region.
Did not exist. They claim the identity is a modern construct.
Precisely.
So how do they explain that? What's their view on the historical Tatar people?
According to these sources, the historical Tatars were a group of nomadic tribes, lived somewhere east of the Mongols.
Okay. And what happened to them?
They claim these original Tatars were completely wiped out, annihilated by the Mongols around 1202-1204 AD.
Wiped out completely.
That's the claim. And that they had no written language, so little is known about them from their own side. The sources even add that after destroying them, some neighboring people started calling the Mongols Tatars as an insult.
An insult. And Genghis Khan
allegedly ordered the execution of any Mongol who called themselves Tatar. That's how negative the name supposedly was then.
Okay, so if those historical Tatars were annihilated centuries ago, where, according to these sources, did the modern Tatar identity come from? The one applied to people in the Volga-Ural.
This is where the sources make their most, let's say, provocative claims about historical engineering, deliberate action.
So?
They attribute the first use of the Tatar name for the Volga Bulgars specifically to Ivan III back in 1480, ordering Russian scribes to use that term.
Ivan III. Okay, so that's one step. But the big shift.
The truly significant and, highly controversial claim is that the modern Tatar Republic and the contemporary Tatar identity were established much later by Leon Trotsky in 1923.
Trotsky. That's extremely specific. Why Trotsky? What's the source's reasoning or alleged motivation?
Well, the sources allege this was a deliberate act by Trotsky, driven by his political views and, according to them, a conspiracy involving his ideas about Khazars.
Khazars. How do they fit in?
Whom the sources identify as a Bulgar dynasty, actually. So Trotsky's views on Khazars and Zionism, they claim, were involved.
Zionism, too. This sounds complex.
It is. The sources state that the ultimate goal from this perspective was simply to destroy the Bulgar identity. They don't elaborate much on the precise mechanism of this alleged conspiracy involving Khazars and Zionism, just that the source claims this connection exists and was a motivation for Trotsky.
Okay, so sticking to what the sources claim happened, how exactly did Trotsky and others supposedly create this new Tatar people in 1923?
The sources claim that Trotsky and Mikhail Kalinin, who was head of state then, effectively just designated people.
Designated them.
Yeah. Approximately 500,000 demobilized Bulgar soldiers, 300,000 Bashkirs, and 200,000 Nogais and Altais. They were just labeled Tatars.
Labeled by the state. Were there reasons people accepted this?
Well, according to the source, this happened during a time of widespread famine, and incentives like grain or positions of authority were allegedly used to persuade people to accept being called Tatar.
And the language they spoke?
Was Bulgar, the source insists, but it was officially understood to be called the Tatar language.
Wow. That's a very strong accusation. A modern, deliberate redefinition of a whole people's identity.
It is. And the sources don't just claim the name was applied, they make a very pointed claim about the meaning of the word Tatar itself.
What do they say it means?
Within the Bulgar language, according to these sources, the word Tatar means godless person, or it's considered a harsh insult.
Godless person, serious.
That's what they state. They specifically add that Tatarka, referring to a Tefar woman, means prostitute in Bulgar.
That's incredibly offensive.
Yes. And the source insists that calling oneself Tatar, based on this claimed etymology in Bulgar, is basically an admission of being godless.
This narrative then extends into more contemporary issues, doesn't it? Particularly around census data and self-identification.
It does. The sources allege widespread and systematic census manipulation for decades by officials in Moscow and locally.
Manipulating the numbers. How?
They claim census data is deliberately falsified to drastically undercount Bulgars. They cite the 2010 census as a really specific example.
What happened in 2010, according to them?
They claim millions identified as Bulgar, but the official report only listed 1,732.
1,732 out of millions.
Yes, and the source describes that specific number, 1,732, as a deliberate mockery, claiming it was the exact number of the academic's own relatives who identified as Bulgar in that census.
That's quite an accusation of targeted manipulation. So what's the source's estimate of the actual number of Bulgars in Russia today?
Around 11 million, they estimate. That includes 6 million they call Kazan Bulgars, plus millions more among groups like Chuvash, Bashkirs, Karaches, and Bulgars, who they also consider Bulgar.
And they stress the importance of self-identification.
Hugely important. They strongly emphasize how crucial it is for people to write Bulgar, specifically spelled with a U on census forms.
Why the emphasis on the spelling?
To ensure they are counted correctly, they argue, and can potentially receive resources like Bulgar language textbooks.
Do they acknowledge any challenges to people doing this?
Yes, they mention practical challenges. Lingering fear among people due to past repression, they say. And in some communities, issues like alcoholism are mentioned as factors preventing people from writing Bulgar in the census.
They claim this undercounting isn't new either.
No, they note that even back in Soviet times, they claim thousands identified as Bulgar, only for these numbers to be significantly reduced in official reports.
Okay. This narrative of suppression and redefinition seems to lead directly into the source's broader assertion about history itself.
Yes, the deliberate erasure and distortion of Bulgar history through, manipulating historical terms and narratives.
What kind of terms are they talking about?
They argue that specific historical terms widely used today are not just inaccurate, but actual deliberate fabrications, designed to obscure and erase the true history of the Bulgars.
Such as?
They list terms like Khazar people instead of the Khazar dynasty, which they state was a Bulgar dynasty, Tatar people instead of Bulgars, who were labeled Tatars, Kazan Khanate instead of the Kazan region of Bulgaria, and Golden Horde, which they claim wasn't even a state at all.
So in this view, these familiar historical terms are basically tools of suppression.
Precisely. That's exactly how they're presented. And the sources explicitly link this alleged suppression to specific groups.
Like who?
They claim Zionism actively opposes the use of the name Bulgar.
Why would they, according to the source?
Because the source claims Bulgar can mean God's chosen people, a term they allege Zionists wish to reserve solely for Jews.
So they're claiming active opposition based on the meaning of the name.
Yes. The sources claim that media and culture globally, which they describe as Zionist-controlled, and even the Moscow government, which they claim is influenced by Zionists, are involved in prohibiting the use of the name Bulgar.
That's a significant claim about influence and control. They also touch upon religion's role in identity, don't they?
They do. The sources state that while religion is important, it shouldn't be intrinsically tied to national identity.
How do they illustrate that?
They use the example of the historical Bulgar ruler Kubrat. According to the sources, Kubrat sometimes changed religion, even converting to Islam and then back to Christianity for political reasons.
Suggesting pragmatism over fixed religious identity.
Exactly. Presented to suggest that, historically, this pragmatism regarding religion was separate from the core national Bulgar identity.
And they sort of bring this section to a close by reiterating their core assertion.
Yes, that the distortion of Bulgar history isn't accidental. It's a deliberate, ongoing effort, occurring through various powerful channels, academia, media, government actions.
All working together, in their view, to perpetuate a false narrative.
And conceal the true, ancient, and vast history of the Bulgars. It's a narrative that paints a picture of a hidden ancient history spanning continents, a vast global identity suppressed.
And historical truths allegedly twisted for centuries through specific political and cultural maneuvers.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
Right. And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it's really crucial to reiterate our purpose here. We aim to delve into the viewpoint presented in these specific source materials.
And they certainly offer a truly distinct perspective from mainstream historical accounts, presenting a comprehensive alternative history, really.
By exploring these sources, we've laid out their key claims from that reimagined siege of Kazan and the mapping of an ancient, expansive Great Bulgaria.
To the really controversial narrative about the modern creation of the Tatar identity and the alleged ongoing suppression of Bulgar history and identity.
So, now armed with these specific claims, as presented by these sources, you, the listener, can reflect on the sheer scale and nature of the historical reinterpretation being offered here.
It definitely makes you consider the power of historical narratives, how identity can be shaped, challenged, and, according to this viewpoint, deliberately hidden or distorted over time.
And perhaps a final thought to leave you with, drawn directly from the source materials themselves.
Given the source's insistence that this Bulgar identity is a global ancient heritage, shared by potentially hundreds of millions across various cultures, even races, encompassing peoples we usually see as Slavic, Turkic, Finno-Ugric, and more.
What does that perspective suggest about the very nature of nationhood and history as we commonly understand them?
Yeah, what implications does that viewpoint have if you were to accept it for how we categorize peoples and understand our shared past? It's a big question.
It certainly offers a lot to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.